Okay, welcome. Shaking the table. Welcome everyone to session number 268 of Kevin Reed's A Course in Miracles. We are in the Manual for Teachers, and we will focus today on question number 19. What is justice? I just might start by saying it's so beautifully written. You'll see how succinct it is. It really condenses the message and gets right to the point. I liken it to haiku poetry, but a few more words. Okay, let's just begin. Justice is the divine correction for injustice. Injustice is the basis for all judgments of the world. Justice corrects the interpretations to which injustice gives rise and cancels them out. Neither justice nor injustice exists in heaven, for error is impossible and correction meaningless. In this world, however, forgiveness depends on justice, since all attack can only be unjust. Justice is the Holy Spirit's verdict upon the world. Except in his judgment, justice is impossible, for no one in the world is capable of making only just interpretations and laying all injustices aside. If God's Son were fairly judged, there would be no need for salvation. The thought of separation would have been forever inconceivable. Okay. Justice is the divine correction for injustice. Let us, every time we read the word justice, substitute the word separate interests or separation. Injustice. Injustice is equivalent to the thought of separation, the belief in separation, the belief in separate interests. Okay? Justice is the correction for that. Justice is the idea of there is no separation. There is only the oneness. So justice is the divine correction for injustice. Right? He uses the word divine here because it's a reflection of the divine. It's a reflection of heaven, where there is no separate interest, there is no separation. Right? But here, where we find ourselves in this situation, right, it's the reflection of the divine. Right? Injustice is the basis for all the judgments of the world. So the thought of separation, the belief that we all have separate interests, which makes for, to put it nicely, a competitive world. Right? But you can just look around you and see how the competition sinks to, as we say, a cutthroat activity. Right? And justice is the basis for all the judgments of the world. Justice corrects the interpretations to which injustice gives rise and cancels them out. Justice, which is, right, the realization that there is no separation, right, it corrects all the interpretations that the thought of separation gives rise to. Once I believe I'm separate, start the merry-go-round. There it goes, we're at the carnival. Right? Once I believe I'm separate, there's all kinds of interpretations that arise. Right? Right? Now everyone is interpreting everything according to their own separate needs, which is basically the first law of chaos. Right? The truth is different for everyone. Right? But justice corrects that. Right? So the idea that I don't have separate interests from you is the first step. Realizing that we all have the same interest, which is escaping this world of separation, escaping this world of different truths, of chaos, of you or me. We all have at least we all have that need in common. We need to get out of that mindset, out of that belief. Right? So justice corrects the interpretations to which injustice gives rise, and it cancels them out. So I keep going to my inner guide, my eternal inner guide, and I ask, help me to see this correctly. Correct my interpretation. I don't want it anymore. I see where it leads. I want to start off at least with the idea that there are no separate interests. We're all in the same boat. We all have the same need to escape the world of separation. So neither justice nor injustice exists in heaven, he says. Right? It's meaningless, the meaningless terms. Right? Because error is impossible. Right? In the oneness where we truly exist, error is impossible. Right? There are no mistaken interpretations. You just realize that you exist within the Godhead. You exist within the initiator of creation. In this world, however, forgiveness depends on justice, since all attack can only be unjust. Right? In this world, forgiveness depends on justice. Right? My being willing to see you and my seeing you and realizing your innocence depends on justice. It depends on the fact that we're not separate, that we don't have separate interests. Right? And as I say, a very initial step in that is just by realizing that each one on the planet has the same interest. We need to rise up from this world of separation. We need to be saved, so to speak, from it. Right? In this world, forgiveness depends on justice, since all attack can only be unjust. Right? All attack comes from the belief in injustice, so in separation. Once I believe I'm separate, I'm attacking everything. First I attack God, and then I say, oh no, that was a stupid mistake. I got to get out of here. And I project into the world, because the mind is that powerful. It miscreates this wonderful, so to speak, universe where you can get lost. Right? But then I start seeing individual separate things, and I start attacking them. And by attacking them, I mean I'm projecting guilt onto them. I'm blaming them, right, for my situation. And it all rests on the fact that I believe I'm separate, the injustice. Right? Remember, he's just substituting a word here. Right. Let's see. Since all attack can only be unjust. Sentence 6. Justice is the Holy Spirit's verdict upon the world. Right? The Holy Spirit's verdict, so to speak, is justice. There's no separation. Right? You're all okay. You're not separate. You're all one. Right? Justice is the Holy Spirit's verdict upon the world. Except in his judgment, justice is impossible. Right? So aside from the Holy Spirit's judgment, in this world, justice is impossible unless we enlist the help of the Holy Spirit. Right? Because if I just go on looking through the filter of the ego, I'm going to look through the eyes of separation. And then I got to get what I need, one way or the other, by hook or by crook, flattery or violence or whatever. I got to get mine. Except in his judgment, justice is impossible. For no one in the world is capable of making only just interpretations and laying all injustices aside. Right? That's in the ego view. Unless we're enlisting the help of the right mind, right? Jesus, Holy Spirit, whatever image of unconditional love you want to use, okay? I've said it before, but I laughed. I laughed out loud the day I heard Ken Wapnick say, this woman stood up and said, "I think I'll call my inner guide ISIS." And he said, "Okay, that's okay." He says, "Call it Jesus, call it Holy Spirit, call it ISIS, call it Calm Yonkel if you want to." And immediately somebody raised their hand and goes, "Who's Calm Yonkel?" And he said, "That's the guy that sold bagels in Williamsburg, Brooklyn when I was a boy." So any image that evokes unconditional love is a good guide. My friend uses Mother Mary, she calls it. It's okay. All right? As the movie said, lighten up, Francis. As long as it's a loving image, right? Go to it. Because it's only an image of who you really are. And in the light of that image, answers arrive and they fit your situation. You can come back from your visit to that loving space and you will be your foundation will be love. And if you need to do or say something, you will. And if not, you'll just be a channel of love. But without that tool, so to speak, going to the mind, it's impossible. All right? Justice is impossible without that tool. Right? Without that willingness to be corrected and going to that space in the mind that knows the correction. Okay. If God's Son were fairly judged, there would be no need for salvation. Right? The thought of separation would have been forever inconceivable. All right? So he prefaces that, of course, by saying, except in the Holy Spirit's judgment, justice is impossible, looking through the ego's point of view. For no one in the world is capable of making only just interpretations and laying aside all injustices If God's Son were fairly judged, there would be no need for salvation. All right? Starting with yourself. If you judged yourself fairly, there'd be no need for salvation. If you judged yourself fairly, meaning if you accepted and were aware of your own innocence, there'd be no need for the escape from the ego's thought system. Right? If God's Son were fairly judged, meaning you know you're not separate, you're not judging yourself as being guilty of separating from the oneness, of destroying the oneness, you're not guilty now. Right? If God's Son were fairly judged, there'd be no need for salvation. The thought of separation would have been forever inconceivable. Right? But as long as we're in the bodies, we need correction in our own terms. That means it fits your situation. That's that law of chaos, the first law of chaos. Everybody's truth is different. But we all think we have these unique situations. All right, so the correction will fit your situation. All right, as long as you believe you're in this body. Paragraph 2. Justice, like its opposite, is an interpretation. It is, however, the one interpretation that leads to truth. This becomes possible because while it is not true in itself, justice includes nothing that opposes truth. There is no inherent conflict between justice and truth. One is but the first small step in the direction of the other. And the path becomes quite different as one goes along. Nor could all the magnificence, the grandeur of the scene, and the enormous opening vistas that rise to meet one as the journey continues be foretold from the outset. Yet even these, whose splendor reaches indescribable heights as one proceeds, fall short of all that wait when the pathway ceases and time ends with it. But somewhere one must start. Justice is the beginning. Wonderful. Spectacular, the crescendo. All right. So he says, you have to start somewhere. All right. Let's start with justice is the beginning. Justice, realizing that we're not separate. We have no separate interests. All right. It might seem that way. It might seem like the person that jumped in front of me on the line, right? The line jumper. They took my spot. It may seem that way. So I'm going to start interpreting their move. Okay? But if I first take a breath, I go to my inner guide and I ask, help me to see this correctly. Help me to understand what just happened. You know, intimating, I want to see this through the eyes of peace. Okay? And realizing that there must be a motive that this person has, that they, whatever it is. All right? But I can react peacefully. I can react peacefully. Ideas, thoughts will come into my mind quickly. That will help me be peaceful and not condemn the other, not project guilt onto the other. And, it's a small thing, but, if it happened to you, or if it has happened to you, you can recall the intensity of the irritation, so to speak. Okay? But we have the beginning Justice is the beginning. The thought that we don't have separate interests. We need to escape from this world that gave the line jumper the thought, I gotta get here. I gotta get out of here, whatever. I'm in a hurry. They only have, 10 things. Or they have 10 things, I only have 2. Whatever justifies their move, that comes from the belief in separation. That I'm going to be miserable if I don't do this. Right? I'm going to lose out on something if I don't jump the line. Right? But just the thought that, okay, we all have the same need to escape that world of fear, intensity, and the intense anxiety, and the shrewish nature of having your needs met. So you pause for an instant. All right? Justice is the beginning, because you got to start somewhere. All right? And he says justice, like its opposite, it's an interpretation. All right? So I can interpret the line jumper simply through the eyes of justice, saying that, we have the same need. We have the same need to escape this rat race, so to speak. Okay. It's a beginning. It's a good beginning. That means we're not different. We're just not different. All right? So it's an interpretation. Right? It is, however, one interpretation that leads to truth. Right? It's a stepping stone. Right? That leads to the truth. All right? The quantum physicist David Bohm, who reached great heights of awareness through physics, he described his progress as stepping stones, as if he were stepping on stones to cross the stream, right? And then coming to this great awareness that everything is connected, right? So justice is one interpretation that leads to truth. It's a stepping stone. This becomes possible because, while it is not true in itself, justice includes nothing that opposes truth. And what he means by it, it's not true in itself. It's not the ultimate awareness. It will lead you to the ultimate awareness. Right? It will lead you to the ultimate awareness. Right? Because it includes nothing that opposes truth. It doesn't include anything that suggests separation. There is no inherent conflict between justice and truth. Right? One is but the first small step in the direction of the other. So justice is the first small step in the direction of realizing the truth, which is beyond breathtaking. The path becomes quite different as one goes along. All right? Jesus implying process once again. All right? That once we've taken those steps, those small steps, all right, as we practice asking Jesus, Holy Spirit, call me Uncle, Mother Mary, Isis, whatever your image of unconditional love is, as we practice asking that love for corrected perception, the path becomes quite different as you go along practicing. And he said, nor could all the magnificence, the grandeur of the scene, and the enormous opening vistas that rise to meet one as the journey continues, be foretold from the outset. He says you can't even imagine how it's going to be. All right? You can't. The grandeur of the scene, the enormous opening vistas that rise to meet you as you go on your journey. Your perceptions will change. You will notice. You will, after a while, it will become noticeable. Let's put it that way. All right? That you're a little happier, a little less anxious. As Jesus would say, you smile more frequently. All right? That furrowed brow, it eases up. All right? Doesn't stop you from losing hair, but that's the way the body goes. All right? But that won't bother you. All right? That's okay. All right? Yet even these wonderful realizations and the way you see the world is becoming different, yet even these, whose splendor reaches indescribable heights as one proceeds, even these fall short of all that wait, of all the things that wait when the pathway ceases and time ends. Right? So even all the happy awarenesses, right, and the decreases and the eventual dissolving of anxiety and fear and guilt, right? It says even that falls short of what awaits for us when the pathway ceases, right? When you have reached the final awakening, right? And the truth arises in your mind, the awareness arises in your mind. And time ends. Right? Yet even these, whose splendor reaches indescribable heights, as one proceeds, fall short indeed of all that wait when the pathway ceases and time ends with it. But somewhere one must start. Justice is the beginning. Paragraph 3. All concepts of your brothers and yourself, all fears of future states, and all concerns about the past stem from injustice. Here is the lens which, held before the body's eyes, distorts perception and brings witness of the distorted world back to the mind that made the lens and holds it very dear. Selectivity and arbitrarily is every concept of the world built up in just this way. Sins, in quotation marks, sins are perceived and justified by careful selectivity in which all thought of wholeness must be lost. Forgiveness has no place in such a scheme, for not one sin but seems true forever. Right? So all these sins, they seem like they're true forever. Right? So he says all concept of your brothers and yourself, all concept of other people and yourself. Right? I'm including my sisters. Right? I have 4 sisters. How could you not include them? Right? So all concepts of your sisters and yourself, all fears of future states and all concerns about the past stem from injustice. So he's got the past, present, and future going on, stemming from the belief in separation, stemming from injustice. all fear of the future, right? All concern about the past, right? They stem from injustice, stem from the belief that I separated. Because if I realized, when I realized that I've never been separate, right, from the oneness, there is no time, there is no past or present, there is no stuff that happened 30 years ago, right? It's amazing how when you got nothing else to think about, you know, the ego will start showing you movies from your life, you know, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and tell you how enormous the mistakes were, how embarrassing you behaved. You know, it's enough to keep you up at night. But that just comes from a concept of myself. And the concept is I separated from God. I separated from the oneness. So here I've lived a life where I've done all these dumb things, these embarrassing things. Right? And I try to make excuses for them. Right? All concepts of your brothers and yourself, all fears of the future, and concerns about the past stem from injustice. So this lens of separation, injustice, right? Here's the lens which, held before the body's eyes, distorts perception and brings witness of a distorted world back to the mind that made the lens and holds it very dear. All right, so I believe I separated from God, and I use that lens to look at the world. And then that lens gives me the reports. Look at that, look at everybody, look at this one, look at that one. Right. Just when I say that, it reminds me of my mother. She had a hip operation late in life, and she was in recovery, but she was still having the effects of the anesthesia. So she was kind of like, my niece Jess will giggle at this, because she remembers she was there. My mother saw all kinds of pocketbooks on the wall and things. And then when the doctor came in the room, she goes, look at this one, look at this one. And we were just waiting for what she was going to say about the doctor. So look at this one. She was looking through that lens, which was really magnified with the effects of the anesthesia. Right? But that's what we do. We look through the lens of separation. Look at this one. Right? And we could start projecting guilt, finding fault, all that. That's all guilt, finding fault. Right? It distorts perception. It brings witness of the distorted view back to the mind. So it like convinces us and reinforces the idea of separation. Distorted witness of its distorted world back to the mind that made the lens and holds it very dear. We think this is very important. Right? We hold it very dear. I'm an individual. Don't tell me about oneness. I'm a separate individual. We hold that thought very dearly. All right? And if you don't think so, you just wait. Just keep observing yourself and asking for correction. And don't, you don't have to wear a hair shirt or whip yourself or anything when you find out that you do hold that individuality very dearly. Don't worry about it. Just ask for the correction. Help me to see myself correctly, right? Help me to have the oneness, the awareness of oneness rise up in my mind, right? Sentence 3, paragraph 3. Selectively and arbitrarily is every concept of the world built up in this way. Right? Sins are perceived and justified by careful selectivity in which all thoughts of wholeness must be lost. So through that lens, there is no wholeness. All thoughts of wholeness are lost. So then I can select and pinpoint who's guilty, right? Who the sinners are. Whew. And I mean, recently you could see the rise of people who know who the sinners are, you know? Oh my God. I mean, 30 years ago in Greenwich Village, I saw a shirt with Jesus standing there with the open arms and the wide arms, and it says, "Jesus, save us." And underneath it goes, "From your followers." I thought it was great. Oh my goodness. But that's because there's that lens of separation and separate interests. So we know who the guilty people are. Sins are perceived and justified by careful selectivity in which all thought of wholeness must be lost. Forgiveness has no place in such a scheme, for not one sin but seems forever true. All right, so forgiveness seems forever, it's gone. Forgiveness has no place. Right? And when we're looking through that filter, right? Paragraph 4. Right. Salvation is God's justice. Right? The escape from the ego thought system is God's justice. You're not separate. You're not guilty. Right? It restores. Salvation restores to your awareness the wholeness of the fragments you perceive as broken off and separate. And it is this that overcomes the fear of death. For separate fragments must decay and die, but wholeness is immortal. It remains forever and forever like its creator, being one with him. God's judgment is his justice. Onto this, a judgment wholly lacking in condemnation, an evaluation based entirely on love, you have projected your injustice, giving God the lens of warped perception through which you look. Now it belongs to him, not to you. You're afraid of him and do not see your hate and fear. You do not see your hate and fear yourself as the enemy. You think God is the enemy, right? In reality, right, you are immortal as spirit, right? The thought of wholeness, it's always in your mind, waiting to rise, waiting to remove the clutter. And I keep saying the process that I use is help me to see correctly. Help me remove the clutter. Right? I could use somebody to help me in my apartment too. Right? So salvation is God's justice. Right? The escape, the lifting of the idea of separation. The escape from the ego's thought system is God's justice. And it restores to your awareness the wholeness. Right? The idea of the wholeness rises up in your awareness. It restores the wholeness of all the fragments you perceive as broken off. I see everything in the world as fragments, broken off pieces, right? And separate from me. Right? And it is this that overcomes the fear of death. Once that idea of wholeness arises in my awareness, I realize I am not separate from the oneness. I am whole. I am not guilty of separation. And if I'm not guilty, I have no fear of being punished. The fear of death is removed. There is no punishing God who's going to stomp me out. Who's going to curb stomp me. I always thought, that's a horrible image. Erase that from your mind. Cancel, as they say in the Silver Method. All right? And it is this that overcomes the fear of death. All right? Salvation, the thought of wholeness, overcomes the fear of death. There's no separation, therefore no guilt, no punishment. All right? For separate fragments must decay and die, but wholeness is immortal. It remains forever and forever like its creator, being one with him. You are immortal. All right? How can the immortal die? You are forever one with him. Right? God's judgment is his justice. Right? And onto this, a judgment that is wholly lacking in condemnation, an evaluation based entirely on love. So onto this reality, you have projected your injustice. I have projected my idea of separation. I'm separated from that. So you have projected your injustice, giving God the lens of warped perception through which you look. Now I think God has this lens, looking at me as a sinner, waiting to get me. Right? Now, you have projected your injustice, giving God the lens of warped perception through which you look. Now it belongs to him and not to you. All right? So I've projected it onto him. He's the one. You are afraid of him and do not see you hate and fear yourself as the enemy. You don't see it. We don't see it. I don't see it. I fear my true self. I'm afraid to approach my true self. I'm afraid I'm going to be destroyed. All right? And this is the lens we've just projected it onto a God. All right? This crazy God that runs around the Bible, killing people and picking out the good people. All right? Even in the New Testament. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Okay, but a lot of people interpret that as that Jesus is the only true Son of God, which is not right. All right? Jesus told the apostles, the things that I do, you will do. He was trying to tell them we're all one. There's no separation. But we project the separation onto God. And so we fear God, that he's going to come and get us. So the ego sees separation, right? And therefore it condemns, right? And it just banishes his followers. And it tells his followers, do the same thing. Condemn everybody, right? And this is the God that has been pervasive in the Western world, at least. And then you see it in all, theistic, so to speak, religions. There's an angry God. Even before people were thinking about Jesus, even before anything, tribes would write on walls, that there's something out there that's going to get you. Don't go out there at night. Don't go out at night. It's bound to take your life. All right? There's a bad moon on the rise. But that's the projection. All right? Now it belongs to him, not to you. And you don't see that you're actually afraid of your true self. All right? You think you're going to lose something. So, paragraph 5. Pray for God's justice and do not confuse his mercy with your own insanity. Perception can make whatever picture the mind desires to see. Remember this. In this lies either heaven or hell, as you elect. God's justice points to heaven, just because it is entirely impartial. It accepts all evidence that is brought before it, omitting nothing and assessing nothing as separate and apart from all the rest. From this one standpoint does it judge, and this alone. Here all attack and condemnation becomes meaningless and indefensible. Perception rests, the mind is still, and light returns again. Vision is now restored, and what had been lost has now been found. The peace of God descends on all the world, and we can see, and we can see. Okay. So he says, pray for God's justice. What he actually means is pray to your decision maker. Ask your decision maker, the decision-making part of your mind, right? Help me to see correctly. Right? That's praying for God's justice. Right? And do not confuse his mercy, right? Which is all-inclusive. His mercy is all-inclusive. Don't confuse that with your own insanity. Right? The belief in separation leads us, we are automatically insane. Right? Just look at the root of the word insane. It's insano in the Latin. It just means not healthy. So once I believe I'm separated, once I believe in the injustice, I'm not healthy. My mind is not healthy. And he tells us right straightforward, perception can make whatever picture the mind desires to see. Remember this. It's a choice. What do you want to see? You want to see separate interests and confusion and chaos and all that comes with that? Or do you want to see the oneness? You want to experience the oneness? All right. You get what you ask for. All right. So perception can make whatever picture the mind desires to see. Remember this. In this lies either heaven or hell, as you elect. What do you want? God's justice points to heaven just because it is entirely impartial. Right? That word impartial means it's everyone. Right? There's no part. There's no partiality. There are no parts. Right? God's justice points to heaven because there are no parts. It's oneness. It's impartial. It accepts all the evidence that is brought before it, right? Omitting nothing and assessing nothing as separate and apart from all the rest. Right? It just assesses everything in the point of view of oneness. From this one standpoint does it judge, and this alone. Right? This one standpoint is, to repeat, oneness. There is no separation. From this one standpoint does it judge. That means everything is part of the oneness. Right? You especially, well, included. Right? I say especially because we're the starting point in the belief of separation. All right? So here, all attack and condemnation becomes meaningless and indefensible. You can't, you say, yeah, but what about this? Look at that. All right? All right? It's indefensible. And at this point, perception rests. The mind is still. And light returns again. Vision is now restored. What has been lost has now been found. The peace of God descends on all the world. And we can see. And we can see that repetition is, it's got that note of exaltation. We can see, finally. Right? And I like that kind of a nod to the song, I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. Right? We can see. We can see. Amazing grace. Right? How sweet the sound. And that grace is the awareness of the oneness, because that's what saves a wretch like me. All right? And it's a choice for the grace. Help me to see. All right? And the peace of God descends on all the world. Alrighty then. That is my fervent desire for you all. That the peace of God descend on all the world. See you next time.